Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Holy Donuts podcast. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit fun. I got Dave Raley on the show. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
And we are actually going to be we're going to start off today. We're going to do some live donut reviews. Well, I guess they're not live. This is pre-recorded, but we will be
It
doing
feels
donut
live to
reviews.
me.
It's very live for us. It's not a simulation, I promise. Okay, so Dave, I'm going to let you start off. You have some special donuts there, and then I've got an old standby that we're going to do. Tell us about the donut you've got.
I'm so excited about this, Matt.
And then give us your honest review. You're going to have to take a bite of it. We want to score it, scale 1 to 10. You get to take one bite of it. That's the rules. And then give us your honest score on how that donut is.
Okay, so just a little bit of context because, and I love the whole Holy Donuts theme because that is a secret passion of mine is anything sweet, really, but donuts are a favorite. And the town that we live in, I'm based outside of Seattle, Washington, is called Poulsbo. Okay. And the reason it's called Poulsbo is because it's a Norwegian town. Like it's known as Little Norway in our area. Okay. Which means in the middle of our town, we have a Norwegian bakery called Sly's Bakery. Okay. So I have my little Sly's Bakery here.
Okay.
So if you're ever in Washington and you get west of Seattle, you have to go to Sly's Bakery. Okay. And so a little bit cheating on the review because I've been going to Sly's Bakery. I just realized next month will mark about 20 years of going to Sly's Bakery. Okay. So I know this donut, but this is called and for those of you that can actually see video, this is the Danish donut.
Okay.
Which is ironic Danish donut for a Norwegian bakery. Yeah. So it is a flaky pastry, it's a glazed donut, but it's like sort of like a croissant meets
kind of like that cronut vibe
people talk about. Yeah. So I will try it because I do love the Danish donut.
Isn't it fun eating food live on a video? I don't usually have people watching.
I can't eat this whole donut on the podcast.
No, just a bite. Okay. Honest assessment. What are you getting out of this donut? Out of this Danish donut?
This particular Danish donut, because it is very tricky how they make it, it's probably an 8.5.
Wow.
So it's really
strong.
good.
Okay.
But I mean, easily 9.5. Like, man, you told me not to give it 10, but it's my favorite.
It would be pretty close. It's your favorite donut. Okay, that's fair. That's what that spot should be reserved for. Is like, this is the best donut I've ever had in my life. Okay. Sly's Donuts. Link in the show notes.
Donuts. We take our girls. We've been taking our girls since literally they were born. Once a week, we go on Sundays before church, and we have a Sly's donut and have conversations as a family, and go on with our day. So,
all right. So Sly's Danish donut, 8.5. Mark it for the history books. I am way less interested on this. So I'm going to do something that I've not had this donut in probably a decade, but everyone who watches this is going to know this donut. Anyone listening is going to know this donut. So this is Krispy Kreme's classic glaze. Like, we are going with a staple.
OG.
It is the OG, American donut, I think, or at least in the South it is. I don't know about up in the Northwest, but I haven't had one of these in a decade. My youth group in Sunday school days were just littered with cramming a dozen of these in my mouth and having an absolute diabetic coma. But I've not had one in a decade. So I'm going to try it, and I'm going to give you an honest review on this. The first thing that comes to mind, these things are kind of small. They're pretty petite little donuts, right? And
you do need to point out that you have 6 in that box.
I have 6 in this box. I am not going to eat 6 of these. These are going to go to my children if they eat all of their dinner tonight. That's kind of the goal. So I'm going to take a bite. We're going to see how this is. Okay. Before I give a number, it is a sugar bomb. I mean, this is literally, I could not eat nowadays more than 1 or 2 of these, and these are tiny. And it's got so much butter in it that it literally almost melts in your mouth. It tastes less like a donut and more like almost like a piece of candy. It's literally that kind of. I'm not sure that I would call this a donut. This is probably candy. If you love Krispy Kreme, sorry for the hot take. I couldn't eat more than 1 or 2. It's delicious in its own right. As a donut goes, though, that doesn't really fall in donut category for me. That's a sweet treat of something. That's something else entirely. I'm gonna give it. Oh man, I'm gonna get killed for this. I'm gonna give that a 6.8, 6.8. I think that's a. It's
6.8.
okay.
Okay.
There's a reason to eat it. Like it's not great. It's just that's not a donut. That's something different. But I know why people love them because I mean, if you need a sugar high, that's your thing. So Krispy Kreme, classic glazed donut from me, 6.8. Come at me in the comments. Totally fine. If you disagree, tell me why you disagree. But hot take, that's not a donut. That's
Yeah,
something
opening
different
on a
entirely.
controversial note. I love
That's
it.
okay. That's okay. I am also though because you were going to do the local thing. I'm rocking some coffee out of my Nick's roast
Excellent.
famous roast beef coffee mug today. Shout out Beverly, Massachusetts. Local spot. My wife and I used to eat it all the time when I was in seminary there. So also got a little bit of my local flair to go along with my corporate consumerism of Krispy Kreme. So
Love it.
all right, Dave. Let the people know a little bit more about you. We've met a few times now. You are someone who huge amount of history in the kind of Christian nonprofit space, working on the campaign side, working on marketing side. Give us a quick snapshot of kind of how you got into the space. You're now founder at Imago Consulting, so kind of give us just your background.
Yeah. Yeah, you asked the question how I got into this space, and it really starts with I met a girl. And I was thinking
That's
about that. I
awesome.
thought I
Yeah,
can't believe that's the start of my story. But
yeah,
seriously, was living in Southern
yeah,
California, engaged to be married. My wife is from Oregon,
yeah,
and we were living outside of Los Angeles. And candidly, neither of us wanted to stay
yeah,
living in LA. And
yeah,
so we thought,
yeah,
well, we're young, we're getting married.
yeah,
Where do we want to move? And I'm originally from Southern California. She's from Oregon, and so we neither of us really, wanted to move to our hometown. And so we said, let's just try the Seattle area. It feels like that's a cool part of the country, and
yeah,
we each had one family member in the area. And this is where the career comes in. Is I
yeah,
just started looking for work. I did not
yeah,
know that you could work for charities and
yeah,
nonprofits. Like I didn't know there were paying jobs. I thought that was like a thing you did, on the weekend in a volunteer capacity or what have you. And so I still remember, I was looking at, Microsoft and Washington Mutual Bank and companies like Amazon, by the way, were not on the radar when
yeah,
I was looking for
yeah,
work. And just through a whole series of circumstances, found a guy who knew a guy at this
mm,
agency called Masterworks,
yeah,
which for some of our listeners, you'll have heard of
yeah,
Masterworks, agency that specializes in faith-based nonprofits.
yeah,
And it was just like a light bulb moment because I had wanted to. I was a double degree in marketing and digital, and
yeah.
it's like, man, I thought I would just have to, get a job selling toothpaste and
Right,
then,
right.
figure out where the fulfillment side of life was. And so that was now 20 years ago. If you haven't
Okay.
picked up on the math.
Yeah,
And so it's been a huge blessing. And I've served a lot of nonprofits, certainly a lot of faith based nonprofits as well.
yeah,
And just it's been an incredible journey, but a lot of years in marketing and fundraising, building the digital team, certainly at the agency, as well as a number of other teams before launching the advising practice that I do now. Still working with charities and with businesses on things like recurring revenue
yeah.
and what's happening in their organizations just around growth. So it's been a
Yeah.
fun journey.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, man. One of the things I always like to ask is about, campaign strategies. Your time at Masterworks, obviously kind of a unique role in that you got to work with a bunch of different clients on a lot of different projects, a lot of initiatives, a lot of campaigns. Was there a lane of that that you think is really effective that nonprofits need to be focusing on in terms of types of campaigns, types of programs that really are kind of the best ROI for their ministry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, thinking about, I mean, you certainly do need a diversified fundraising approach,
Yeah,
but there's especially when you say ROI, right? There's so many different sort of channels. The
yeah,
thing, and I hinted at it earlier, is and where I've taken a lot of my advising practices around what's happening in the recurring giving space.
yeah,
It's certainly higher ROI when it comes to particularly the long term value as well as just kind of in the general direct response fundraising space. But from my perspective, it's always been important, but really the last 5 to 10 years has really completely changed the game in terms of accessibility for that type of giving and those types of programs.
So you say the last 5 to 10 years have changed the game. Say more about that. How
Yeah.
has what's happened in the last 5 to 10 really had an impact on that?
Yeah, if you look at the history of recurring giving, particularly in North America,
Yeah.
a lot of people say, well, it's, 100 years, something like that, which, that's a long, long time, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, if you really do your history, the first recurring giving kind of sponsorship program goes back almost more than 100 years. It goes
Okay.
back to the 1800s, the early 1800s, by the way, not the late
Wow.
1800s. And so, recurring giving has been around, forever. If you even study history,
Yeah.
biblical history, or
Yeah.
otherwise,
Yeah.
you realize that this idea of a recurring,
Yeah. Yeah.
gift is not a new concept. But what is new and what has really changed is the subscription economy.
Okay.
And what's been happening, particularly with how consumers have changed their behavior, their expectations, and their engagement with what banking industry calls discretionary
Yeah.
automated
Yeah.
payments, aka you don't have, like, it's not like your mortgage payment or your power bill.
Yep.
Um, that has really transformed the way consumers act and think, which has in turn changed the way donors are now behaving, because those
Yeah.
consumers are donors, right?
Yeah.
You and I
Absolutely.
are members of the subscription economy,
Yeah.
and so it's always been interesting to me, candidly, over the last couple of decades, to see these different kind of consumer trends really lead the way in terms of changing behavior, which then do impact donor trends.
Yeah.
Well, hey there, Holy Donuts listeners. Ever feel like your nonprofit's donor experience is like a jelly-filled donut with no jelly? Well, don't fret, we found the jelly to your donut dilemma. Enter WeGive, the software tool that's like the cream filling to your eclair, or should I say the glaze to your donut. With WeGive, you're not just taking a donation, you're rolling out a red carpet for every person who gives to your organization. And with WeGive, you get an incredible donor portal, events, pledges, surveys, segmentation, on and on we could go on the features. And those checkouts, though, smoother than my attempt to make homemade donuts, which, let's just say, didn't quite rise to the occasion. See what I did there? With WeGive's innovative engagement tools, your donors won't just feel the love, they'll be coming back for second. Because nothing says thanks for your dough better than a world-class experience. So if you want to sprinkle some extra special magic on your donor relationships, check out WeGive.com.
Can you maybe speak to the nonprofit out there or the marketing director that's saying, hey, listen, like, we've got recurring giving as an option on checkout, and we've got like a monthly newsletter that goes out. Isn't that leaning into the subscription? Isn't that having a recurring donor program? You kind of differentiate maybe that model that's just very, well, of course, you've got recurring giving as an option and you've got a monthly newsletter, from what you're actually talking about with building these monthly donor programs or really leaning into the subscription economy for donors.
Yeah, and by the way, if you have the checkbox, which hopefully you do, on your website, that's great. Like, you should have one of those, and you will, by the way. A lot of organizations are seeing just natural organic growth because donors are just choosing it as a convenience factor.
Yeah.
Now, I do think the real opportunity is to actually, how fast can you grow and how much can you grow if you really are intentional about it. But really, historically, there have been three kinds of recurring giving program. I mentioned one, which is sponsorship or one-to-one. So I, the donor, give on a regular basis, and I am paired with a beneficiary who receives some sort of value. So a child sponsorship situation, or a staff support, or a missionary sponsorship, or in the idea is I'm paired with an individual recipient. The problem with that model is that the vast majority of nonprofits don't have programming or the structure or the means to actually execute a one-to-one
Right.
sponsorship type of offer. So that's category number one. Category number two of recurring giving is membership. So these are organizations that provide where the donor is often, at least partially, the donor is the beneficiary. So they're receiving some sort of maybe goods or services, or maybe just they listen to the radio program, or they they are a member and they receive value, or their family receives value. And in membership programs, you can think of organizations like your local zoo or museum or public television or public radio, where again, I give, but I give at least partly because there's some sort of benefit to me, and I value that benefit, and I want that benefit for me and for my people that I love. But there's a problem, Matt, and that is the vast majority of nonprofits don't have the kind of programming and sort of model where the donor is the beneficiary, and so they can't really tap into membership, which basically leaves the category you just described, the third category, which is everybody else without like with a glorified checkbox, or in the olden days, it was a glorified check writing program.
Right.
Like, please give us money monthly. Please, friends of the organization.
Exactly.
And it's actually that category, which my estimate is about 75% of nonprofits fit into that third category. That's the category that stands the most to gain from this shift in you don't have to have sponsorship, you don't have to have membership in order to actually create a strong, healthy, renewable, sustainable source of revenue that you can rely on to do the work that your organization is called to do.
That's huge. And if a nonprofit's out there and they say, hey, listen, like, where do we even start with this? Like, what's ground step one? Like, okay, so we've got this checkbox, or maybe we don't, right? We need to get that set up. Where would they even begin? Are there tools, resources? Are there tactical steps that you recommend just as a starting off point?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is just take stock of what you have. That's that first piece. It certainly, yes, do you have the checkbox? Can people actually sign up, go through that experience? But, how many recurring donors do you have now that are active? How much revenue did you see from those donors in the last year? And by the way, look at total revenue from those recurring donors, because we found that recurring donors are often the most generous single gift donors, additional donors. So on average, we see somewhere around 25% additional giving on top of the recurring giving amount. So if you have $10,000 a year or $1 million a year coming in from your recurring donors, you should see, in the case of 10,000, it'd be 2,500. In the case of $1 million, it'd be $250,000 in additional giving from those nonprofits. So first step, take stock of what you have. I had a wise mentor once say to me, it's really hard to know where you're going until you know where you've been. And so it's like, where are you today?
Right.
And start from that place. Don't look at the organization that's got the $1 billion program and 50% of their revenue from recurring giving, unless you're, pretty close to that space. So take stock of where you're at. And then I would say evaluate your current experience through the donor's eyes. And this is really hard for leaders to do themselves, but you can do it. It's just you need to step outside of your, I know the reasons why things work the way they do hat, because you'll have all sorts of good, very legitimate excuses why the experience maybe is not as awesome as it should be. So oftentimes, either I'll suggest that somebody have an outsider, somebody's spouse, or a local, volunteer to actually go through this process of like signing up to become a recurring donor and documenting what they receive. We do that for the clients we work with, where they come in, and one of the first things we do is a total secret donor project where we evaluate. And I've been doing this for years, Matt, and it's just like, I call them facepalm moments, because it's like, oh my gosh, the receipt didn't go out, or it's like it's not really advanced fancy stuff. It's like, did you communicate?
Right.
How quickly? What did you communicate? Did you get their name right?
Basic stuff.
On the response device. And so I think if you do either, you have an outside, group like ours do that, or you do it yourself, you're going to find some pretty obvious, big stuff if you just can take your I'm a marketer hat off and
Yep.
put your I'm a donor hat on and
Yeah.
think through it from their perspective.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and I would definitely recommend an outsider doing it. Mostly because if you're the marketing director, the quirks in say your user interface and how to get around them, right? And how to you're like, oh well, of course that button lives there. Well, you know that because you built it, right? Or your team built it. The donor doesn't know that. And so I would definitely recommend working with an outside team like you guys at Imago or anyone. I mean, again, it could be a volunteer who's shown up, only a few times, doesn't have someone outside do it so that they really are coming at it with a clean slate. I think that's great advice. Okay, let's shift macro. We kind of get in the weeds there a little bit, which is great. I love that tactical stuff. Let's go macro. Tell me about a trend that's a little bit concerning to you in the nonprofit space right now, and one that's kind of exciting to you.
Ooh, okay. So let's do concerning. I'm happy. I don't know that I'm happy to talk about what concerns me, but I think that's the piece where we get the most motivated. And I really do think it's what's been happening with the state of generosity over the last, probably decades, but really, and we just had Nathan Chappelle. I don't know if you know Nathan, but Nathan and Chappelle and Brian Crimmins just wrote a book just about a year and a half ago called The Generosity Crisis.
Okay.
And it's a very good book, but it's one of those where you're like, oh boy, it's like,
it's gonna be heavy.
Take my medicine. Like, oh, it sounds like a good. And it's true. I told Nathan, I said, man, I'm 2/3 of the way through this book and I am just like depressed. Whatever, he's like, I promise we get to some solutions. I was like, okay, great. But it is really, I would call it a call to action, a call to arms, an important moment in the history of philanthropy, at least for those of us in the West, to understand that we can't just take for granted that our culture, our heritage is one of philanthropy and generosity. That's changing, the way younger generations, for example, see generosity. It's like, well, I Venmo'd a friend who, needed help. Like, so I give charitably, and it's right. But also there are these 501c3 nonprofits, and fewer people than ever before are seeing, are sort of thinking of charity through that traditional, IRS designation lens. And so it is a call to action. They do propose some solutions. I think they did a really good job though of just catalyzing like this is an issue. And that is just to give you the short version. What is the generosity crisis? The short version is there are fewer donors than there were before, and the trends are negative that way. A lot of the headlines are about the number of dollars, which have mostly gone up, although last year they did go down in individual giving. But that's because of a few mega donors, the Mackenzie Scotts and and the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts who which is awesome. I think that's great.
That's great.
They're doing a lot of good, but it's masking an underlying problem, and that is your core day-to-day citizen is not giving like they used to.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of reasons why, but I'm more interested in the solutions to that problem.
Yeah. Well, then that leads us nicely into something exciting that you're maybe seeing for nonprofits across the space.
Yeah. So not to beat the dead horse, because one of the things they talk about in the book is, certainly artificial intelligence, personalization, all those sorts of things. But I'm going to come back to the subscription economy and what's been happening with what I call subscription giving.
Yeah.
And it is so important because not only is it sustainable, ongoing, recurring, and so when you see these charts where giving is going down, you've got to look under the surface. So, for example, Matt, as we're recording this, 3 different nonprofit studies have come out in the last week on giving in the year 2023. And every one of those studies cites that basically overall giving is essentially flat or down. But every one of those reports, when you look one layer under the surface and you look at the difference between one-time giving, or basically single gift giving, and recurring giving, in every case, it's the one-time giving that is down, and recurring giving is up. So in the case of, for example, M&R, who is one of the, they've done online benchmarks for years and been just a wonderful contribution to the industry. M&R found that, for example, in online giving was down 1%, which, by the way, as a digital fundraiser for years, I'm like, whoa, I remember the days where you could you would have to actively sabotage your fundraising strategy not to grow 20%, in digital. And so overall digital fundraising down 1% over the last year. But you look under the surface and the truth is that one-time giving was down 5 or 6%. And recurring giving was up 5 or 6%. And so what you're seeing is the under the surface trend is that one-time giving is declining. And I'm not knocking one-time giving, by the way. I've done a lot of that for a lot of years, and that's an important part of the puzzle. But it's just harder and harder to get those one-time gifts. And so what are we doing to create true loyalty and ongoing sustainable giving from those donors who, partly because of the subscription economy and partly because of other reasons, are more warm and open to giving on a recurring basis than they've ever done before.
Man, there are 35 questions I wish I could ask you, but we're going to be at a time crunch today. Okay, if folks want to, I always ask about resources, but you're kind of a walking resource hub. So I just want you to have space to tell us about some of the resources that you have available to help nonprofits and ministries grow. Think through digital, think through monthly recurring donor programs. Tell us about some of those resources and how people can contact you if they're interested.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. I would say the best resource that I put a lot of mind and heart and effort into is a weekly column that I write. It's called the Wave Report. And it is essentially trend spotting. So the Wave Report is a total, surfing metaphor, the Southern Californian in me, which, by the way, I am a wannabe surfer. I am not good at actually surfing, but I have taken some lessons and I've learned a thing or two. And I think there's a lot we can learn from surfing, by the way. But the idea of the Wave Report is, what are the waves or the trends, the insights, the leadership lessons that we can use to help grow our organizations. And so that comes out every Friday. Put a lot of time and research and effort into that. And folks can sign up for that on our website. It's imago.consulting. So not .com, Imago, which is IMAGO, imago.consulting. And you can just click on weekly trends, and that's our Wave Report. Also post pretty regularly on LinkedIn. I love it that we now have, I remember the days when you were like, is my Facebook profile where I'm supposed to post work stuff,
professional stuff?
My cousins don't want to hear
about
they
don't want to hear about what I do.
Economy. No, so I love it. I saw very active on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. But go to the website imago.consulting or just hit me up on LinkedIn. And then the last piece is we do a podcast.
Very cool.
And so we record a podcast. A co-founder and I created a podcast called the Purpose and Profit Podcast.
Awesome.
And the whole point of the show is to interview leaders of causes and brands. So we have people from brands like Disney. We have people from brands like Domino's Pizza and Netflix. We just interviewed a guy who was part of opening the 3rd ever Blockbuster store.
Okay, that's awesome.
And so it was like, wow, everyone talks about Blockbuster, as the cautionary tale of missing innovation. But I'm fascinated to learn about Blockbuster that literally invented a category.
Absolutely.
So they were the innovator, right? What can we learn from the early days of Blockbuster? So we interviewed Tom, is his name. But then we also interview leaders of nonprofits. And so Charity Water, Tom, who I just mentioned, is now
Yeah.
actually the chief people officer at Compassion International,
Yeah.
International Justice Mission. And so the whole point of the show is, what are the lessons that we can learn from the world of business and brands, and what are the lessons we can learn from the world of causes, and how can we what are the ideas that come at the intersection of those two worlds.
Awesome.
And so that's purposeandprofitpodcast.com, or most people just use whatever their favorite podcast feed is.
Yeah. Awesome.
Big bright pink logo, so you
Yep.
can't miss it. But not as cool as the Holy Donuts logo, but pretty
Listen,
standout.
We're a little outside the box. We do our own little thing over here, and we're gonna
We'll
let
have
you
to
guys keep having
offline,
the guys.
Matt, on how, if you look at your podcast feed, like how many logos are just like muted, like blend into the background. So I know I
You see what we're doing.
what you're doing.
I appreciate it. Okay, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time today, man. I learned a ton. I know our audiences really appreciate you coming on. Dave Raley, founder at Imago Consulting. Go check out the podcast, check out the wave, check out the website, hire them, do all the things. Wonderful people doing wonderful work. Dave, thanks so much.
Yeah, man. It's been good.